Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's CTBUH Turkey's webcast, Future Design Trends in Construction. I'm pretty sure it will be very enlightening one with expert matters from around the globe. First of all, I would like to give a brief information about Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat for the ones who may not know. I'm representing CTBUH for Turkey. With Light Disinfection as well as Mehmet Sakin and Burak. The Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat is the world's leading resource for professionals focused on the inception, design, construction, and operation of tall buildings and future cities. Trends indicate that the world's cities must accommodate an additional 2.5 billion people by 2050. But the way that this growth emerges is still up for debate. Through a myriad of exciting initiatives, the Council is providing guidance to the shapers of our urban landscapes with the goal of enabling smarter, more sustainable cities and more viable future for global populations. We disseminate multidisciplinary information on tall buildings and sustainable urban environments to maximize the international interaction of professionals involved in creating the built environment and to make latest knowledge available. The CTBUH is a non-profit organization that has also developed the international standards for measuring tall building heights and recognize superior achievement in tall and urban building projects globally through the CTBUH Awards program. CTBUH developed internationally accepted criteria for measuring tall buildings heights and are recognized as the arbiter for bestowing such designations as world's tallest building. And CTBUH is not an organization who advises to build high rises. People may have that kind of understanding. Also, for this event, BIM for Turkey helped us out, also one of our sponsors. Building Information Modeling and Management Association. We would like to thank them as well for helping us on this. And BIM for Turkey is the center of transformation for the construction industry in Turkey. It aims to facilitate the integration of building information modeling and management easier and smoother to the construction industry, higher education and public companies. Having said that, the coronavirus pandemic has changed everything, as you all know. Its impact on global wellness and the economy has forced organizations in every industry, including our own, to flex and evolve, both in real time and in long term. In this collection of ideas, tips, thoughts, and strategies, we explore how design can play a role in making the world a healthier place. That's why we are starting our webcast right now. I'm turning to my colleague, my partner in this business, Mehmet, Genc, to take over and moderate this webcast. Enjoy, please. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Mehmet, thank you for the great introduction. I think it is always very helpful to go through the mission of CTBUH and how they are guiding and structuring tall buildings around the world. I think we have a great agenda for you today with valuable people and best what they do in their business. Again, hi everyone. I'm Mehmet Genc, Operations Manager, acting as Project Director on Ziraat Towers project in Turkey with Turner. For the most part, I worked in the United States for some time, a little over 10 years, and then another almost 10 years in Turkey right now on the project management side of our company, Turner Construction. Once again, our topic today is discussing potential impacts of COVID-19 pandemic and concerns on designing structures in the future and on certain existing property structures. We want to thank again to CTBUH as well as BIM for Turkey for enabling us to have this platform to conduct these informative webinar sessions. Towards the end of the webinar, folks, you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions. You can throw your questions during the webinar. We will be collecting them, and we are going to have an open session with questions and answers towards the end of the webinar. I encourage you to think of some questions if you haven't already done so, and throw them up there, and with our great guest speakers, we will try to address them. We do have very distinguished guest speakers today. One of the best, if not the best, at what they do at exceptional international design firms. They're guiding and leading and the industry with innovations and their work. They are friends. They're very humble people. We like them a lot. We like working with them, and we really appreciate them spending time with us today, allocating some of their quality time for this webinar. These folks designed and worked on high-quality variety of structures: commercial, residential, mixed-use, hotels, shopping malls. So I would like to welcome each one of you again, and thank you for your participation. I want to ask Niall, let's start off with you to introduce yourself, please. Would you please introduce yourself, Niall?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today to speak with you and to connect with some of my friends in Turkey. My name is Niall Dempsey. I'm an architect and partner with Foster & Partners based in London. I've worked with the company since 2007. During that time, I have mainly spent half of that period of time working in Asia on a number of projects, master plan projects, health, education, residential, and the other half of that time working in North and South America. And over the course of that 13 years, I spent almost that entire time traveling back and forth to Turkey, a country that I enjoy very much visiting. Foster & Partners is a global studio, a studio for architecture, urbanism, and design, founded by Norman Foster in 1967. We're a 1,400-strong multidisciplinary team based in London, and we have a network of offices around the world. Some of our long-standing offices are in New York and Hong Kong since the creation of the HSBC Tower. We are a multidisciplinary practice, as I mentioned, of architects, urban planners, interior designers, and you can see here, this is a small glimpse of our world. And at the moment, this is I guess the bit that you miss the most, is that casual encounter with all of these different individuals in the office, sharing ideas and sharing thoughts as we remain isolated in our homes and virtually connected. And that's it.
Brandon, Perkins&Will, another great company like Foster & Partners. Can you please also talk about yourself, Brandon?
Yeah, I would be happy to. So first, just to reiterate what Niall said, I just want to thank you for inviting me to participate in the event. It's a real pleasure to be here talking about what are obviously incredibly important issues in the built environment, and hopefully I can add an interesting perspective. My name is Brandon Buck. I'm a design director at Perkins&Will in London and the leader of the architecture group. I have worked on projects in the UK and abroad, including Turkey, which is a wonderful country. Perkins&Will was founded in the United States by Lawrence B. Perkins and Philip Will Jr. more than 80 years ago, with the mantra that people must always be at the heart of everything we do. And I think that philosophy, combined with our passion and curiosity, continues to motivate and inspire us today. We have about 25 offices, studios around the world, approximately 2,700 employees globally. In London, where I work out of, we have approximately 180 staff, for the most part, all working productively from home at this point in time. We had been fortunate enough to already have a fairly robust IT setup in place that allowed for the successful transition from office work environment to the home work environment, which helps. We offer workplace strategy, interiors, architecture, and urban design services, and our work covers a range of sectors, including commercial office, residential, retail, hospitality, science and technology, and healthcare. We have in-house expertise relating to technology, sustainability, and well-being, and our approach generally is predicated on research-based design that uses data to inform key design decisions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Mehmet Okutan Bey, how about yourself?
I think I'm the only engineer here. Thank you very much. I feel privileged to be here with you in this webinar, and I would like to thank you very much. The Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat programs are great. They bring together interesting guests, and I think at this time, extra helpful it will be during this COVID pandemic, during which we have to assess what's happening really and try to guess the future. I'm Mehmet Okutan. I'm the director of Akutan Engineering, one of the leading MEP design and consulting companies in the region. Akutan Engineering was founded in 1965 and has been operating in Turkey, the Middle East, and CIS countries, including Russia, Azerbaijan, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Georgia mostly. We have good knowledge on European norms, American standards, and SNP standards, and are actually experts in working in multicultural environments. Our designs strive for a high level of comfort and security in built environment, and I believe they succeed in bringing forth energy efficiency and sustainable systems optimized to local requirements. I am a mechanical engineer with higher education on energy efficient building systems and green building architecture. I'm a graduate of MIT and Middle East Technical, specializing on building technology. I lived and worked in US, Russia, Egypt, and Turkey, ran our Moscow and Baku operations. And since 2012, I've been running mostly Turkish operations now and international at the same time. I enjoy living here because it has got good access to both European and Eastern countries, and I benefited from Turkish construction sectors developing recently, getting stronger internationally over the last 3 years. We have been involved in many different types and sizes of projects. These include large use complexes such as Metropolis in Moscow or Zorlu in Istanbul. And we have designed high-rises such as Oko Towers in Moscow, 16 with SOM, and we are doing one in Ankara now, Merkez Ankara with KPF, and another one in Istanbul, Central Bank. And we have completed over the years more than 100 hospital projects, including recent PPP hospitals. We also were involved in smaller but sophisticated projects, some of them with Niall, such as one example could be Yapıkredi Beyoğlu Cultural Center by TED and Sabahat Hanım Museum by Tümer Tekin and Gümüşoğlu now. And I think that's it from my side.
Well, Mehmet Okutan Bey, thank you again. We always take pride. We really, you guys really make us proud to have such a company in Turkey, being able to keep up with international designs and work on these large projects with the well-known architects like the ones we have on the online today. So, you guys,
thank you.
Great, it's great. During the pandemic, many companies had to exercise, that includes us actually, of course, to minimize the risk, such as social distancing arrangements in the offices, online meetings, utilizing programs such as Zoom, that we all use right now, Microsoft Teams, for the efforts of minimizing travel, if not completely eliminating it for a certain time period. You're leaders in key international design firms. I think a lot of folks would be interested in to hear your experiences during the pandemic, limited travel. How did you conduct your business with travel restrictions? Any key items you can think of you learned from it moving forward? perhaps use of time for meetings with limited travel, came to realize meetings at different locations could be more productive with the assist of online tools. So how did you manage your teams during this period? Niall, would you tell us about your experiences during this period for the way that you were running the business?
Absolutely. I mean, we all know it's well documented, the huge and sudden shift we've had to make in our professional and personal lives. And to relocate such a large office as ours, 1,400 staff, to their homes and to continue to operate in a smooth fashion has been a credit really to our IT department. They've done a wonderful job. From a personal point of view and the architects and the support teams that I work with, I wasn't that surprised that we made the transition so smoothly because we are a global practice, as we mentioned. Our clients are based all over the world. We are used to WebEx calls and presentations and meetings, virtual presentations. So that was really quite easy for us to do. I think the challenge is some of our younger staff live in quite tight and small residential apartments. So the younger people, I think, are finding it more challenging. Our IT department has done a great job, but of course that has put travel on the back foot. And the travel hasn't really been an issue because it's universal. It's our clients understand we cannot go to them. There's an acceptance now that it's a WebEx call and all dealings and presentations are done in a virtual sense. So it has helped us that it's a global issue and that it's not specific to one country or another country, which I think would have made it much more challenging.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so you guys were somewhat prepared for this pandemic and lockdowns and restrictions because you already practice online and long distance business styles with your clients as well as I would figure. Brandon, how about yourself? Anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I thought Niall's response was excellent, and it's not too dissimilar from what we've experienced. I guess the two or three things I'd add is, I think the dynamic with our clients has slightly changed. They've become much more involved in the process because it's very easy to conduct online meetings now. Everybody's very savvy with technology over the last 2 or 3 months. We've had a crash course in working from home. So the dynamic with clients has slightly evolved. And then, I miss the office. I've enjoyed working from home. It's been lovely spending more time with my family, but I certainly miss going to the office. And I think when life allows for the safe journeys into the office and working within a safe environment at the office, I think, like Niall alluded to with the younger generation, I think a lot of people will flock back.
I see. Mehmet Okutan Bey, how about yourself? The things that you perhaps had to do and learn from, possibly.
I agree with Niall and Brandon. Actually, I spend most of my time on online meetings anyway because I'm doing mostly jobs outside Turkey with UK-based architects. So just like Niall, we started this online meetings and online collaboration maybe nearly 10 years ago, and now it is very efficient. It is part of our working life. The only change during this COVID was just as Brandon described. Usually the clients prefer us to physically present it in their offices, and they usually can concentrate only when there is some physical presence, some of them, I mean. But now during this COVID, even the top management and the decision makers were able to spare some time on previously they couldn't, like mechanical or electrical systems of the project, and they were actually interfering and they were actually providing input to the whole process, and that actually increased the quality of our work. This is what I think. And also, since everybody is now trying to get used to this online collaboration and communication, I think the place of the experts and the location of the job is even less relevant. And the absence of travel is actually saving both time and costs. And you can, that obviously you need those meetings where you get together for brainstorming and important decisions, etc. But most of the job, design-wise and planning-wise, can be done online.
Yep, certainly. I think that many industries are learning from this pandemic, and the way that they conduct their business, the way that they hold their meetings, and everything is going to have some changes. I think a lot of people are learning from this and developing some better procedures as they can. I personally think that almost no one was prepared for this type of pandemic. No one in life today, right now, has probably never experienced something like this in their lifetime. And no industry was fully prepared for this pandemic. Many difficult decisions quickly needed to be made, having to consider many perspectives, the economic impact to the countries, normal order of life, trying to protect of society, security of the cities, and most importantly, the human lives. Organizations, companies have to take quick actions, short-term solutions at their facilities, properties, such as adding, extending partitions, organizing, reorganizing restrooms, elevators, escalators, modified meeting rooms. They could not consider any aesthetical look of their properties because perhaps the millions of dollars and funds that they spent on the design of their existing properties, they couldn't care. They just needed to act fast and take actions, precautions to protect human lives. So, as we continue to learn from this pandemic, and then there's actually time to design for it, the structures. What changes, potential requests, possible code changes do you foresee designing future projects in different markets, end user, occupant expectations? I want to start with you, Brandon. So how do you think the design of these future structures could possibly be changed short-term, long-term, and perhaps mid-term? What are your thoughts, Brandon?
I guess a couple of things. So okay, so you got that first slide up. So I think that's a huge question, Mehmet. I think there's a lot of components that go into the response to this question. And I think it is helpful to maybe break down the pandemic into its phases, and we can talk through some of the issues that relate to the different phases of the pandemic. So this particular slide, this particular image shows a graph taken from the World Health Organization's Pandemic Influenza Risk Management Report from May 2017. And I've got a little note there that shows where the United Kingdom is, and that's not universal right now, but that's talking from experience here in the UK. You know, we are in this transition phase, and we've come out of the pandemic phase where global lockdowns were enforced, and I think this transition phase is about where offices are now reopening, and interim workplace options are established to address, reasonable protection in the workplace and provide employees with the comfort, the peace of mind to return to work. And I think from what I'm seeing of late, projects in the short term, projects on site that are due for imminent completion are looking at different measures to mitigate the transmission of the virus and keep users safe and healthy. There is still time to carry out some of these types of enhancements. And actually, a fortnight ago, I was asked by one of our clients on a project, a commercial office project in the City of London, if we could look at some of the ideas you've talked about, some of these post-pandemic office designs. looking at social distancing, ideas to minimize the spread of the virus, whether that be less hot desking or fewer open plan spaces. Not necessarily groundbreaking advancements, but really important issues nonetheless. But even in this kind of transition phase, is there a version of life where people are required to wear face coverings in communal areas, including lobbies and receptions? Maybe regular thermal scans may need to be carried out on each building user. Any person entering the building may be asked about their recent travel history and may be denied entry if they've returned from a severely affected region. So you add these measures to increase building ventilation, improve air quality with better filtration systems that Mehmet can talk with more sophistication about. And I think buildings can actually act as a barrier to the spread of the virus. But as we move out of this transition phase that we're currently in into this inter-pandemic phase, the phase between pandemics, where workplace policies and protocols are adjusted to integrate new ways of working whilst optimizing workplace well-being, I think we'll see again a shift forward. I think, and everybody feels a little bit different about the pandemic, but I'm very optimistic that a vaccination or an effective treatment will be produced to overcome COVID-19.
Yeah, we all certainly hope so.
I think the long-term impact on this particular pandemic, on the design of offices in particular, will manifest itself perhaps in two ways. First, as we've discussed, we've had a crash course in working from home. Some have found it productive, if not ideal, 100% of the time. So we may see more working from home on a permanent basis. And then secondly, in the ability for architecture to quickly react and to adapt to future pandemics. We're exploring scenarios where in the normal state, open plan offices that encourage social interaction can be rapidly reconfigured during a pandemic to allow for distinct workspaces and circulation routes whilst maintaining effective means of communication and collaboration between employees. As an aside, you hear a lot of rumors. One of the rumors I heard was that people are talking about spreading the lift cores out in new buildings so that passenger lift lobbies are more spacious to allow for social distancing, but I'm not sure I see that. That feels too drastic for me. So I think, as I alluded to, I think my hope is that a vaccine will be developed that will allow for, high density offices to thrive again. At Perkins&Will, we've been working from home, as I discussed before, since the beginning of lockdown. We've been immensely productive and effective. However, I miss going to the office. Many of my colleagues miss going to the office, and we miss interacting with each other. After all, I think collaboration is a key part of architectural design, but it's also critical to many other fields. I think high density offices lend themselves to a sense of community and increased interaction. And these are really important components that we all crave because they're difficult, if not impossible, to maybe replicate when working from home. So people may stay at home a day a week, but most businesses really need human interaction for ideas, innovation, stimulus, and productivity. So I think, I firmly believe actually this is the rebirth of offices, not the death of offices, as I've seen bandied about in the press. So moving kind of away from offices just for a moment, with respect to some of these other building types, I think some of what I just discussed is still applicable, but as a result of working from home, interestingly, there's like a new light shed on the consideration for what residential design should be. And although I can productively work very well at home, I don't really have a great setup here. I share a desk with my wife, and obviously my young daughter doesn't care much for me working from home. So, what does the future look and feel of a home, be after this pandemic, and forcing us to blur that line between the offices and where we live? If you can go back to maybe just 2 slides back. Yeah, one more, please.
We can do that.
Great, thank you. So I just wanted to cover just 2 projects very quickly, very briefly, but this is a project we're working on in Vancouver, Canada, called the Earth Tower. It's a mixed-use development with an office podium and a residential tower component above. It's approximately 350,000 square feet. And I think what's most interesting about this project is perhaps twofold. First, this emphasis on the outdoors and blurring that line between the interiors and exterior environment, which incidentally wasn't a movement, new to now, but has been probably accelerated and become more of an importance as a result of COVID-19 and these lockdowns. So, and I think, as you can see, the tower is based around, these 3-story villages that help humanize the living environment, working towards improving one's well-being. I think the project is really interesting because it kind of reinvents what urban residential life can be like and can feel like. Perhaps we can move just to the next slide very quickly. Great. I guess the second thing that I wanted to emphasize about this particular project was that, and along the same lines of well-being and sustainability, this will be the tallest hybrid timber and concrete construction in the world. The spaces are incredibly bright, full of light, highly dynamic. And I think these ideas lend themselves to the adaptation, I think, when and not if the next pandemic arises. I guess if you could move to the next slide, please.
Sure. Incredible projects.
No, they're lovely spaces. And I think with regards to public space, again, this has taken on a hugely important role of late. And this is a competition I want to just very quickly touch on, which we won last year. And actually, perhaps you can flip to the next slide, please. So this project will be the new headquarters for the European Union in Brussels, Belgium. Again, a mixed-use development of approximately 2 million square feet. And what I really want to emphasize is the plethora and diversity of public spaces, the spaces in between the buildings, framed by these buildings. The idea of living, working, and leisure activities in very close proximity is not necessarily new, but I think with the pandemic will become much more prevalent going forward, considering the concerns and some of these anxieties that people understandably have surrounding public transport.
Yes.
Thank you.
Brandon, thank you very much. Mehmet Okutan Bey, your thoughts on the future buildings, especially when it comes to MEP systems. What do you think?
Well, actually, in the last 10, 15 years, there has been a trend towards more sustainable, energy efficient building. And there came up this interdisciplinary approach, which doesn't really differentiate with borders, let's say, where the architecture stops, where the engineering starts, and etc. So it's like this integrated design approach was getting more attention, and I think it's a great thing because it is actually about optimizing both the comfort and the beauty of an indoor environment, and also the safety and the energy use. And we have been trying to do that for some time now, and everybody, all the sector is actually moving towards this. And I think this COVID pandemic just basically speeded up this approach, because people had the chance to pause and think generally about comfort, health, their future, and their values as well. And because they stayed home, they thought that the house that they are living in should be healthy and should be comfortable, should be safe, and the office as well. And they had the chance to think about what they will do in the coming days in terms of improving the conditions of their indoor environment. And the MEP systems obviously are providing services to maintain that indoor environment. And actually we were lucky because this pandemic happened in spring. People were able to open the window, for example, and it didn't really make them discomfortable, because the air coming in was not too hot or too warm or too cold. But what would happen if it happened in winter time? And it can actually in the second round. And all these actually require us to pay more attention to MEP systems now. They need to be more efficient, they need to be flexible, and they need to be providing required hygiene inside the buildings. So with COVID specifically, people started to think more about indoor air quality. If they have enough fresh air, or are they living in a submarine? Obviously, if it is like 30 years old skyscraper, just like a submarine, I don't think people would enjoy going there again. But in the future, I think all these will be rehabilitated, let's say, to include natural ventilation somehow, and the nature will need to be integrated to the design as well, just as Brandon showed. They are concerned about filters. They want the mechanical system to compensate for the lack of multidisciplinary approach during design. And relying on mechanical systems is not a good approach. I mean, first we have to define the demand and optimize it with a multidisciplinary approach, integrated design, let's say, and then MEP systems can come in. Again, I think in the coming days there will be increasing interest towards more efficient and better mechanical and electrical systems, so that we can provide required hygiene conditions inside the offices, and also required comfort.
Well, thank you, Mehmet Bey. Just a quick reminder, folks, you can throw in your questions as we speak and continue with the webinar. So as you continue to ask questions, we will be going through them towards the end of the webinar. So with that, Niall, can you please go over on your thoughts, please?
Firstly, I share Brandon's optimism that we will come out of this. We've been, I mean, as a global community, we've been in more difficult times before. And I also share Mehmet's comment about the acceleration of change. The shock has been sudden and impactful, and it will no doubt change the way we plan our cities, design our homes, design our offices moving forward. But I could argue that that is a change that was already in process. There's a shift in the work-life balance, the changing face of retail and the high street, and the demand for more healthier working environments. But our line of thinking at Foster Partners is, and our hope is, that the response is not a temporary one, but one with a more lasting impact. We believe that that lasting impact lies in creating resilient design that will see us beyond COVID-19 through the next pandemic, the next financial crisis, biggest health scare. I mean, somebody quoted to me the other day that in a couple of years' time, there will be 70 million people in the Middle East suffering with diabetes. So how do our buildings and designs of the future cope with all of this? I think organizations are evaluating themselves at the moment in all sectors, and they're seeing the need to be more flexible and agile. They're reviewing their virtual world and their physical world, and working on strengthening their communication and their culture and the ability to be agile. So we believe that a strong investment into digital infrastructure will be the way forward to make a lasting impact. Now, Brandon's comment about the premature demise of the office, I would completely support. I think people were too sudden to say that the office model is a thing of the past. The office model is still hugely important. Many would argue for mentoring purposes, back to the Younger people, again, the younger generation, which I think are the biggest sufferers in all of this. They live in very cramped accommodation. They don't have the opportunity to be in amongst the office environment where they learn rapidly on a day-to-day basis. The office is still fundamental for some in terms of recruiting. But the main component, I would argue, is the office culture, is the corporate culture is built and thrives within that environment, as Brandon mentioned, where you have intelligent people who trust each other, who come together in a creative environment. And it's in that environment, we believe, where innovation really happens. So I heard somebody quote the other day that the office of the future will be somewhere where you could have a corporate recharge. So we may have a hybrid situation where we spend some of our time working at home, some of our time working in the office. People have saved time on commute, the value of time. They spend more time with their families, more time doing other stuff. And I think people are also aware of their environment much more than we were before. So I think the real challenge for many organizations is building a virtual version of themselves and marrying that virtual version with the physical version. And that, I think, will be the challenge regardless of the sector. I think the compact residential model will have to be reviewed to see how that will adapt and be more adaptable for people who will live and work more permanently at home. And I think the virtual world extends through to our entertainment, where theaters and cinemas, especially theaters, are in a very difficult position at the moment. So they will look at streaming shows into our homes and building a virtual platform that they will have to connect with the physical world. And I think that's where the challenge really lies.
Yes, indeed, the service businesses, specifically small businesses, service businesses are one of the most impacted ones during this pandemic. Brandon, this question is for you. Due to the pandemic, again, many developers, property owners have been having to make changes to their office space, as we discussed, common use areas, public spaces. Manufacturing industry making adjustments to their production lines to again maintain a healthy environment for their workers. Hospitality industry, hotels are rearranging their spaces to the level of their beach setup. But they're arranging their beaches to promote a healthier environment for their clients, for their customers. So to that end, how the COVID-19 pandemic could change the existing, already built structures? Are you expecting retrofit requests, redesign interior spaces of the existing properties? What are the client end user requests for ongoing design works do you have? Are you modifying design on your ongoing works? That's I wonder about that. Are you modifying anything on your ongoing works? You briefly touched on it. And with social distancing, space is going to be even more valuable in the properties, especially in the metropolitan cities. Do you anticipate more demand on office buildings, or perhaps decrease due to remote working possibilities?
Okay, Mehmet. So I think that's a really excellent question, and some of which Niall, Mehmet, and myself have already kind of touched upon it, but or skirted around some of those issues. I think the real question is, why should this post-pandemic world be different from the pre-pandemic world? Okay, and I guess we've learned as a civilization some things, and we've got new sensitivities that have come to light. And so, what have we learned from this pandemic? And again, without trying to repeat myself or others, maybe we could just recap a couple of these items. So we've talked about working from home, right? you know, why make the trip to work? For many people in London, I don't know about Niall, but for many people in London, it's not a pleasurable experience. I don't really see how social distancing works, even in this transitional phase. This has obviously led to more cyclists on the road, which is only a good thing. But, you know, there's a large portion of our group at Perkins&Will, and Niall mentioned this at Foster & Partners, the younger generation who want that office experience to be part of their career path and want to learn from more experienced designers. A lot of businesses want their people around to inspire and drive work forward. I think the next thing we maybe have learned is these new sensitivities. You know, horizontal and vertical travel in the future holds new anxieties. Our particular workforce would rather drive, which is problematic in itself and not a sustainable means of transport, walk or cycle to work than use public transport. Similarly, traveling in packed lifts up a tower to their workplace may not be a welcome prospect for many people. Maybe the next thing we've understood is the touch points. You know, we already had clients with whom we had pursued no touch points going into and out of WCs. And I certainly expect to see this continuing and increasing with entry doors, lift doors, internal doors, barriers, and the like. And then maybe the fourth thing we perhaps learned is, you know, relating to some of the communal spaces that we use in offices and other types of developments, these meeting rooms, these washrooms, these catering facilities. So, you know, nobody really knows what the future looks like, but for the next year or so, we may be working in some form of social distancing mode. And really small meeting rooms won't work, and the capacity of bigger ones will need to be reduced. We can probably expect some hangover from this, some form of hangover. This also applies to washrooms and catering areas. You know, not to scare anybody, but I recently read an article in the science section of the New York Times that indicated that flushing a toilet can generate a cloud of aerosol droplets that rises nearly 3 feet. And those droplets could be laden with coronavirus and may linger in the air for a long period of time and inhaled by a shared toilet's next user. So, you know, will we see an increase in individual WCs installed with their own wash basins, not too dissimilar from superloos? You know, so those are some of the things we've learned. But you know, going forward, you know, what are our options? There's business as usual, and you know, we're hearing some clients saying that they want all their staff back in the office, just like before, maybe with less density but bigger space takes, which is better for developers, and with, you know, very rigorous hygiene and antiviral considerations. There may be some part working from home. Perhaps the majority of talk that I'm hearing is up to half of staff working 1 to 2 days at home and the rest traveling into the office.
Yeah.
And then maybe some type of hub working. So we've had quite a few discussions about this strategy from our clients where, and one of whom has asked us to look into this, where there's perhaps a slightly smaller headquarters building along with a number of hub offices spread around for staff to walk to or cycle to. So, you know, those are kind of interesting things that life could evolve into. But in terms of design changes and post-COVID specifications, I think I want to touch on a few of these things, and I'm sure others will have also interesting points of view. But, you know, air conditioning. At Perkins&Will, we've been concerned for a while that maybe fan coil systems might actually be helping to spread bugs and viruses, and whether ultraviolet filters and fresh air and return air pass might be specified. Obviously, Mehmet can talk in a more educated manner about this and other service-related spec changes. You know, I think I would prefer to see possibly passive chilled beam systems used as they kind of feel intrinsically safer. And then surfaces, you know, we know, you know, unvarnished copper alloys like bronze have antibacterial viral properties, whereas shiny steel perhaps harbors the virus for longer periods of time. Natural timbers are also host the virus for a short period of time compared to steel. But, you know, scientists are still, you know, this is early days, scientists are still working through their understanding of COVID-19. this touchless journey from the entrance through security up the lifts into one's own demise and into WCs and catering facilities. This approach has been investigated and implemented into buildings prior to the pandemic, but will take on a much more added importance now. And I think linked to this touchless journey, will we see larger ground floor lobbies to enable security and potentially separate building entrances and building exits? I think lifts is also, a highly sensitive issue. Much of this relates to the finishes. But, I think for me, what's interesting about lifts, and I don't know what the government feedback is in Turkey, but, you don't actually spend that much time in a lift. There's understandable unease surrounding vertical transportation. But, with technology, lift cars move incredibly fast now. And some of the guidance that we've gotten here in the UK is that, and guidance obviously changes on an hourly basis, but some of the guidance that we've gotten over here is that you're probably okay in an environment for about 15 minutes. Any longer and the increase, have a much higher risk of infection. So, I truly believe maybe these concerns will be overcome in the interim, and maybe we will see landlords upgrading the quality of stairs to encourage more use, possibly considering more one-way systems and intelligent signage to route people in different directions depending on the time of day and the densities. For many decades, stairs have been hidden away, out of sight, with lift designs really taking center stage. Will this change? Will stairs become more celebrated? Obviously, it's unrealistic to ask people to go up 3 or 4 stairs, beyond 3 or 4 stories to get to their destination. But I think it's a very interesting point. Thank you.
It is for sure. And I'll tell you, Brandon, you touched on it, and I'm going to get to that next, actually, with Mehmet Okutan Bey. The people have been extremely concerned about including myself, actually, using the elevators to get to their apartments, condos in the high-rise or mid-rise buildings, because there has been a lot of also comments and speculation when it comes to use of the elevators. These air particles can hang in the air, and even if you are riding the elevator yourself, you may still be infected. So I'm curious about the thoughts of potential vertical redesign in the future. I'm going to be talking to Mehmet Okutan on that as we continue. Niall, it is said that this pandemic is also changing the preferences of people on their home type selections. There's now more demand on the low-rise to mid-rise apartment buildings. People are seeking, for sure, more interested into having a garden space or a terrace or a balcony in their units, and people will be less inclined to live in the high-rise buildings. Of course, this relates to the type of city people live in, primarily for metropolitan cities. What design and usage changes do you anticipate, especially on the high-rise buildings? And very common question that we have been actually hearing during this pandemic is, are operable windows in high-rise buildings, is it a good thing to do, pros and cons of it, or is it a bad thing to do? Your preferences. I think you may have a couple slides that you want to show this, but yeah, what do you think about operable windows on the high-rise buildings, especially?
Well, I think operable windows on high-rise in any building is a positive, but of course it needs to be dealt with in an appropriate manner. It's good for energy, it's good for health benefits, it's good for energy, but it comes with some challenges, of course. The challenges are air velocity, noise, pollution, and humidity. And there's different ways of treating it. There's different ways of dealing with that. This is our Commerce Bank building that we designed in 1997. The first ecological tower in the world. And it marries the benefits of biophilia and daylight and good ventilation. And you can see the cross section with the internal atrium that's open to the outside, allowing end users to open a window and gain natural ventilation whenever they please. This is one way of dealing with it. And of course, by doing this, it's naturally ventilated 80% of the time, and reduces the energy consumption of a typical seal tower by up to 50%. Then there's another way of doing it, which we're looking at one of our towers in South America. If you go to the next slide, please. This is a building in South America where we, again, the health benefits of biophilia, which we all know about, that contact with nature and the outdoors. This building sits in a very lush garden, and we've carried that vegetation up through the tower, peeling back the structure to open up the terrace to the sky. The facade has been designed on the limitation of the glass panels available within the market.
Okay.
And then we slightly oversized the grid to allow these small vertical slots on both sides. Now, those vertical slots can be, we're having discussions with the client, whether they're operable sections, whether there's some kind of grillage in there that allows it to be controlled, opened and closed whenever required, or potentially to be even a fixed panel today, but in the future, should the tenants demand fresh air, that we could retrofit the building quite comfortably and provide fresh air. So in a way, we're future-proofing the design of the building. And then the next slide looks at a different way. So there's different ways of dealing with the air intake, whether it's simply manually operating a window, whether it's similar to what we've done in our Bloomberg project in London, which is a grilled system embedded within those bronze fins that is connected to the BMS system. So when the air quality is appropriate in the city, the grillage opens and allows fresh air to come in, and you can see it on the next slide. So the air is taken through the fins and then pushed across the floor. And the next two slides give you a bit more detail on that. Of course, the big challenge with, and Mehmet can speak to this more about natural ventilation on larger floor plates, is getting that even distribution so that the person adjacent to the facade is not too cold and the person adjacent to the core is not overheating, and it's finding that balance. So here you can see how we've done it in Bloomberg. The blue arrows indicating the flow of air, and then the last slide just shows you a CFD analysis of that. So I think it's a positive thing from a health and energy perspective, but it is heavily subject to location and climate and the conditions in which you're working.
Okay. Yeah. I personally, like many people, actually fresh air. It's always my preference to have fresh air, no matter how high the building is. But yeah, it needs to be thought out and designed very carefully to avoid permanent future problems on the structures.
Well, I think it's well reported that occupants of buildings feel better when they're more in control of their environment.
Right.
They feel healthier, they feel happier, that they can control their environment whenever they require.
Mehmet Okutan Bey, the engine of the buildings, I call it myself, the mechanical systems of the buildings. Many people became more sensitive to and worried about the interior air quality in their properties. Risks with the existing AC systems and the setup, how the COVID-19 pandemic changed the existing already built structures, what can be done already built, what can be done on already built MEP systems. What is needed for better interior air quality considering a virus pandemic? Yeah, I wanna start off with I myself actually very interested in like what can be done to improve the quality of the air in the existing buildings when it comes to MEP mechanical systems. Okutan Bey.
Okay, can we open the pictures that I sent you? Yeah,
Yes.
I think the first slide shows an air system here, a typical air system. The indoor air quality is based on how you control the contaminants inside the indoor space. So the air handler, which is supplying air to each space, actually mixes some outdoor air with the return air and then conditions it, which means changing temperature, and supplies it back to the room, as you can see. And the amount of outdoor air is actually the minimum amount that you will need to keep your health. And this is actually statistically tabulated, let's say, in some standards. And let's say it is specified to give 10 liters per second per each person. And when we look at the architectural plans, we count the numbers or we assume an occupancy and then allow so much outdoor air to keep the indoor air quality high. This is one of the factors, the amount of outdoor air that is being supplied to each room. And the second factor is actually how this air is distributed within the space. But here I want to show you something. You see, you can see here return air from different zones or different rooms are actually mixed with outdoor air in a common chamber. So even if you close your room and do not open the windows, then actually you are sharing the same air with the other zones, with the other rooms. So if you have a system like this, which is based on mixing the return air, then you may have a problem with indoor air quality, especially when dealing with COVID-19, because you are trying to self-distance yourself, you are trying to use masks, even if you are, say, 10 meters away from somebody else in a shopping mall circulation space. This kind of air handling unit can actually take the COVID from somebody on the third floor and put it in front of somebody on the ground floor, like in 5 minutes. So I think eventually we will need to rethink about the circulation spaces, what kind of systems we should use to condition the space, I mean, control the temperature, also provide necessary fresh air. And the second thing I want to mention is the amount of outdoor air. Can you go to the second slide? Yeah, this one. We don't need to go into detail, but here you will see on the left side there are some functions like schools, like conference centers, offices, etc. Why do you classify this? Because you actually base this amount of fresh air a little bit on the estimated occupancies and also estimated amount of time you will spend in that specific room. For example, if it is a meeting room which you will spend 20 minutes only, then you can actually do with less fresh air. But if it is a room that you will spend your whole day, it has to have ample air so that you don't have these headaches or dizziness or other kinds of diseases. So mechanical system design assumes there are no outside infiltration and sizes the mechanical equipment based on these numbers, counting number of people and assigning some numbers to them and providing so much fresh air to so many people. And this strategy actually works in many other environments such as space stations or submarines, and people don't die. But to improve the indoor air quality, actually, I personally believe that such a system, mechanical system, needs to be integrated with a natural ventilation system that should be available and that should be available for the occupant to be used whenever he wishes, just like Niall just showed. I mean, the problem with high rises is that the wind pressures are so large on higher levels that you cannot really open the window as you would in an apartment on the second floor, let's say. So that mechanism needs to have some means to regulate that air intake and exhaust at the same time. And on the plate also, it is just like a plane on that wind speed, let's say, because the facade facing the wind is experiencing much higher pressures, whereas the leeway side has less. So this actually changes the pressure balance in the building and just mixes up everything. So when you start to incorporate that kind of natural ventilation means to high rises, then that requires really a high level of multidisciplinary coordination led by the architect, of course, but then there needs to be the mechanical system compensating for deviations from the ideal operation, and also the DMS, which is managing everything. Actually, about indoor air quality, I think this is, I don't know if this makes sense, but later on, the COVID also increased the interest towards filtering. How do you filter the air that's coming in or being recirculated? When I check the internet, there are so many different types of filters that are being sold now. I mean, some of them are very simple. And commercially, I must say, the available filters can clean only to some level. Because can you go to the other slide, Mehmet? Yeah, you know, human hair is like 100 microns, whereas the bacteria is about 1 micron. And the common filters we use in commercial buildings can clean bacteria only up to 1 microns or so. And if you need more, as in hospitals, then you need to use special HEPA filters which can clean away the viruses down to 0.01 microns. And HEPA filters are really something special, and it cannot be readily incorporated into existing mechanical systems. But because viruses tend to stick to small particles like dusts or some droplets, even if you don't use HEPA, you may be able to get rid of some of the viruses by using regular MERV-12, we would say, bag filters. So it's like the question of whether if commercially available, regular filters would help. Yes, they help, but they will not clean the viruses. If you want a virus-free atmosphere, you need to go for HEPA filters, as in the operating rooms or intensive cares of the hospitals, which is not really very practical in commercial buildings. I have seen some HEPA recirculators that are sold for in-room applications, just off the rack. I think they may work. I actually recommended one of my friends to take that if in his waiting room. He's a dentist. I'm hoping that it will work. It is not something common, and it is not something designed. But if you are going to target filtering viruses, it has to be HEPA. And there is this UV light disinfection, maybe you heard, and UVC, short wavelength UV light is energetic, and that can actually destroy the DNA of viruses. It can kill them. And this technology has been used for some time now. We have been using it for laboratories and for some septic operation rooms, let's say. After the operation, robots go in with those lights and stay there for a couple of hours. But the success of them killing the viruses really depends on the power, the strength of the UVC, which is very dangerous, and also the amount of time, the exposure time. So you cannot just go and say any UVC would do, and then you just plug it in and then leave it for 15 minutes and everything is gone. That's not going to happen. It is more complicated than that, and it is a specialist subject really. We are using, can you go to the other slide? This is showing the filters classification up to 16 on the top. These are regular bag filters that are commercially used. I mean, they can help dilute the virus concentration, and I would recommend to use them. But the top portion is the HEPA ones. Can you go a little bit more? Yeah, this is the UV filter. UV filters, the lights here are actually used to sterilize the surfaces within the air handling unit rather than the air quickly passing through them. Because the particles accumulate on the filter surfaces, and then when you have a UV light like that, then they will die. So it is helpful. But for the air to be disinfected itself while moving so fast is really very difficult. And I just very quickly want to mention a little bit more about the recovery units. Can you go one more? I think we had another slide. Okay, let me talk about this one because this is interesting. I think this section Niall showed for the facade actually had some depth of plenums on the section that I thought maybe they are using displacement ventilation, because displacement ventilation is a different way, a different approach to ventilation for the offices. It supplies cool air at lower velocities and at lower levels. And then the air actually goes up as a plume from your body and sucked from the top. So there is a piston-like effect. The air is moving vertically and there is no mixing. So this actually increases the efficiency of the ventilation because you actually get the fresh air more easily. And the contamination from one person does not reach the other easily. But the mixed ventilation on the left side is something, the conventional mixing system that's used all over the world, and it is very common. So if you are talking about COVID, this can be a problem. So I think in the offices, there will be also a trend towards, ventilation systems that also address the directional flow within the space. There are recovery units for energy efficiency in the air handling units. They are also actually taking the contamination from the return air and then putting it to the fresh air side when they are trying to recover the energy at the same time. So we need to stop them and mend the leaks if there are any. So this is one of the, I think, precautions we can take. And we also have to disable the demand controlled ventilation and run all air units at 100% fresh air. And in terms of retrofitting, I think if it is possible, trying to avoid central systems and try to go for isolated systems would be more popular because you can control the contamination better that way. So these are the main items about mechanical ventilation, I think, Mehmet. I don't know if I was able to answer your question.
No, it's been very enlightening and informing. Thank you, Mehmet Okutan. And again, I actually do expect on this high qualified buildings around the world, people will be a lot more considering to changing some of their existing MEP systems. So that could be another that could be another business line perhaps for some of the companies. Actually, I think I want to quickly turn back to Niall about the elevators again. When it comes to trying to minimize the potential such a virus in the elevators, Niall, it could come to type of material selections, perhaps minimizing the touching on the buttons in the elevators, voice activated systems more in the future. Any further ideas you have currently for the use of design of and manufacturing of the elevators in these buildings?
I think between Brandon and Mehmet, we've touched on a lot of it. But just to reiterate, in the absence of an antivirus for many of the office buildings, particularly the high-rise buildings, if you take a city like New York, there will be a change in the flow of people entering the building. You'll have staggered arrivals, which means I think that the lobby area now takes on a whole new meaning in terms of how it deals with that, discrete screening, etc. And it's, again, I mentioned it earlier about designing smarter places with intelligent systems, and I guess technology could give us a lot of answers in a touchless environment where you can call the elevator from your phone. You can, Brandon mentioned, you can enter through the security gates again by using your smartphone. And within the lift, there's a couple of things that have been talked about. I think material selection comes into mind. Brandon had mentioned some metals being more friendly towards the transmission of viruses. We know copper doesn't allow mold and mildew to form and to live on its surface, and that it can kill microbes in a matter of hours rather than in a matter of days. So copper is being talked about widely as a metal that could be used wherever you need to touch something, a handrail in an elevator, etc. That's got to be married, of course, with whatever the cleaning or sanitizing strategy is. The UV method, Mehmet spoke about, I've read a bit about UVC as well, about UVC being a potential way of sanitizing the lift in between journey times. But again, it goes back to the science, and the science is evolving every day. And until we know more about the science, then we will know more about the materials that we pick and how we treat those spaces. But I think we need to be understand the impact of the materials we select for our buildings.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Niall. Now I want to go into our questions and answers session. We have a question from Mr. Burhan Shirin. Great to hear from you, Mr. Burhan. Thank you for participating as well. Let me look at your question here. Brandon, perhaps you can respond to this if you could. So Burhan says, more shared spaces, more common grounds, less density are rarely what many developers ask for. Of course, the space is very valuable. He's right. Do you think the market would adapt itself to the demands of such pandemic? So without building regulation and code. So no regulations, no code, but perhaps thinking on the human side of part of the minds of the developers, he's asking, do you think people would incline to do such things and utilize social distancing and sacrifice perhaps some of their valuable space? I think this is what he's saying. Do you expect any tendency in the local authorities in that direction? So government regulations, CDC, Center for Disease Control, perhaps is wondering if, in your opinion, could there be some regulations in the future for designing these buildings also?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. My initial instinct is that, and I think as architects, we are inherently optimistic that things will always improve, and we're working towards that end goal. I think that in this transition phase where we're seeing how life looks like after what has been obviously a very detrimental issue over the last few months, I think there's a reaction that will happen. And then going forward, there might be a slightly different long-term reaction. I think that these larger spaces, these larger communal areas, whether they're ground floors or cafeterias or the whatnot, other associated types of activities may well require people or tenants to take larger spaces to allow for workers to go back and coexist. And I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier when we were talking about another question is, that is, and you mentioned it in the question itself, that is inherently very helpful to developers. All of a sudden, people will need to take possibly more space to allow for these social distancing measures, and buildings will have to get maybe taller or larger or whatever else that is. And I think that's to the benefit of developers. And I think as an architect, that sounds quite exciting to me. In terms of local authority and regulations, I think that's a tricky one to predict. I think it's hard to enforce some of these things on the built environment, on the community. I think that it's easier to badge them under the eyes of sustainability or other associated measures that are already kind of commonplace in regulations. So I would welcome local authorities here in the UK to integrate some of these ideas into the requirements of our design, but I'm not sure it'll come from them. I think it might be as a result of how long social distancing continues into the future, and whether tenants need to, in order to get their businesses back on the feet, need to accommodate these larger spaces, which in turn will lead to developers to build bigger buildings.
Yep, well, thank you. Burhan Bey, I hope this answers your question to the best extent.
Mehmet, I also think that just to add to Brandon, I think there's also area to be gained. If the conventional model of linear rows of desks, in which the individual is fixed to their workstation, I think if we're progressive enough in our thinking, could be a thing of the past. I think the workspace has to evolve, become more adaptable, modifiable, and convertible and scalable, so it can scale up and down according to its requirements. So if we can create a successful model in that, I think there's area to be gained.
Yeah, even further adaptable spaces, modular spaces that is flexible for adjustments. I am sure people will be more considering that type of spaces in their. You guys will be assisting them to implement their thoughts. Mr. Hakan Hazneci, we have a question from you. Hakan Hazneci Bey is referring this question to Mehmet Okutan Bey. Mehmet Okutan Bey, he's asking which type of buildings will encounter more dramatic changes during and post-pandemic era? Your thoughts on, and anybody else, gentleman, who wants to also answer, of course answer, but he's asking if it is institutional, industrial, healthcare, commercial, hospitality, etc. Your thoughts on starting off with Okutan Bey, which again market sector in the construction industry would get impacted with this pandemic? Do you think? A few of them. Maybe there is not a single one, but there could be.
Well, I think categorically we can say if it is crowded, if it is a single volume with lots of large air handlers which mix up the air, there is a risk, which means sports halls, for example, or conference centers, concert halls, and I think shopping malls, the circulation space usually have this kind of problems, but they can be managed. They can they can have a semi-open space for circulation, for example. They can produce more fresh air, and this requires some changes in general planning of these common areas. And offices, Brandon and Niall already talked about that, and I think it can be optimized in some way because it has got plus and negative sides, and at the end of the day, I think it can be a positive thing to redesign the offices. But currently, like 2,000, 3,000 people in a single room and making them stay there for 4 hours in a pandemic doesn't seem likely to me. So post-pandemic, when this is over, hopefully, we can go back to normal and still try to use these buildings, conference rooms and theaters, for example. But then I'm sure we will try to do at least our best to make sure that there is ample air, etc. It is not only about COVID, but there will be some other concerns about indoor air quality when you look in detail as well. Hospitality, I think it can be managed to some level, and residential, I don't think it's going to change that much. We just need a more comfortable, healthier, and I think it can be, the quality is going to increase.
Okay. Niall, Brandon, do you have any idea or opinion on like the most affected construction market?
Maybe just one comment that Mehmet touched on, and that we haven't really gone into too much detail on. But the hospitality sector is a really interesting one. I think it was riding an incredible wave of success prior to the pandemic. The ease within which people were traveling abroad and having vacations was quite astounding. I love traveling. My wife insists we go on holidays regularly, so it's a big part of our life. And I live in London, but my larger family is in the United States, so I've missed that part. But I think with this concern about traveling, concern about airplanes, concern about all these types of things that require you to pass through from your home to the hotel abroad, will we see domestic travel increase? Will we see the advent of more, there's a term in the UK here called staycations. I don't know if that exists over in Turkey, but where people are looking to travel via car to their holiday destinations. And will there be an upgrade and enhancement to existing hospitality hotels or whatnot in the UK or in France or in other areas where people, Londoners, can drive? I think that's quite an interesting dynamic for people to keep an eye on going forward.
Okay. We have a question from one of the valuable vertical transportation consultants, actually. Yavuz Kaya is asking a question about the vertical transportation design. He's saying that there are some features which are using for better traffic and security purposes, like car artificial intelligence control system, destination control at the lift lobby, etc. At the moment, he's saying. We believe that features will be requested more, but as standard feature, he's thinking. Also, we have to use the features which comply the standards and regulations. For example, touchless button is not accepted as per disabled standard. So having said all this, he's asking to Niall and Brandon, when designing the vertical transportation systems, what priority do you give? What priority do you give to vertical transportation design, to the extent you can expand on? Any certain priorities? Or
do you want to go first?
No, you go ahead, please.
I think the priorities are obviously the movement, the ease and movement of the individual. If you take our Hearst building in New York, you enter the lobby, you come up one level and you have destination call, which takes you to a certain category. It supplies you with the number of the elevator in which you need to get to, and quite swiftly you can get to the floor. So I think it's the priority and the ease with which you move through the lobby to get to your floor, your destination. The priority is to remove stress and anxiety. especially in the current environment. And stress and anxiety, I guess, is the accumulation of individuals in a tight space, which a lift naturally is. So there's not much you can do about that at the moment, just reduce capacity. And I think as I go back to smart technology, and there is no real reason why a touchless system can't be implemented to ease that stress and anxiety.
Well, thank you. Thank you. All right, so reviewing the questions here. My question, Mücahit Bilal Göker Bey. He's got a question for you, Brendan. We have worked for nearly all the companies, he's saying. He's asking for an advice. He's saying, what advice can you give the young architects that are watching right now? And which office was your favorite, is he saying?
Well, it's a great point. So what I didn't talk about when I was introducing myself is that I have been fortunate enough to work for some fantastic offices. I started off at Zaha Hadid. I moved across to Foster & Partners, and I know Niall from when I was working there. And then I spent about a decade at KPF before moving to Perkins&Will.
Yes.
So I've had the pleasure of working with all sorts of really interesting and dynamic designers. And it's been a wonderful career so far. You know, I think if there's a piece of advice to give somebody who's either looking to get into architecture or looking to proceed with their career in architecture, you know, I think without being insensitive to the issue or without sounding insensitive to the issue that we are currently facing, I actually think it's a very exciting time. You know, this reimagining of our built environment as a result of a catastrophic event is an interesting challenge. And actually, if you look back in history, it's not the first time that civilizations have had to react to pandemics or to issues. You know, there was a cholera outbreak back in the 1850s in London that caused people to rethink how waste was transmitted across the city, what the public and health infrastructure occurred. What they found out was that water was transmitting germs, so the water supply was contaminated. So, you know, I think there's all sorts of very interesting ways that architects going forward can reimagine the world. So, and again, you know, without not trying to sound insensitive to, you know, incredible amounts of unemployment and devastation across the world, you know, as architects, you know, Niall and I are optimistic, and I think there are some silver linings. You know, that, you know, there's an opportunity to rebuild some of our cities. There's a greater emphasis on sustainability and climate change. You know, all of a sudden now in Los Angeles, you can see across the city, you know, because there aren't all these cars and there isn't this proliferation of smog. So, you know, I think there's some interesting things going forward. And if I was a young architect, I would be really keen to get my teeth dirty, and, you know, get involved in these types of things.
Yeah, I would echo that, and I think it's a real opportunity for change, and change that we shouldn't miss up. Not to overlook the devastation of the pandemic and those who have lost loved ones during it, but it has given us an opportunity to stop, reevaluate, and reassess everything that we do. And as a young architect, as an architect, I think you need to be optimistic and be resilient. But it is a fantastic career to be involved in, because, as Brandon said, it's constantly evolving and you're constantly learning.
Yep. Now another question about the homes the people live in. Do you think that homes will be designed with being used as an office also in consideration? Do you think there could be such a market segment where people are utilizing their homes, residential buildings, and flexible to quickly adapt to an office space also, is the question.
Is that for me?
Yep, go ahead, Niall.
Absolutely, 100%. I think the outcome of this will be, as I mentioned earlier, what I call a hybrid solution. I think we've all spent times in our home. We have probably appreciate the value of time more, the value of the environment in which we live in. City Lab invited people to send, which is an organization inside, invited people to send maps in to them of their environments. People who had a daily walk would draw a map and send it in. This wonderful collection of maps and diagrams, but the predominant theme that came out of it was awareness of your environment. So I think people have the value of time where they will spend, as I think Brandon said it earlier, half their time in the home, half the time in the office. And we talked about the office being the corporate recharge, where you go there, you meet, you have that collaborative energy, and then you take that away into your home where you do your quieter thinking and you evolve the design. So absolutely, yes is the answer to your question. I think it's more at the micro level. Brandon he said he has a small daughter. I have two very small boys who don't always appreciate personal space and social distancing. So, but I'm lucky I have a garden, and at the end of my garden is a small shed, which has allowed me to reevaluate that small structure. And at the moment, I'm converting that small structure into a space where I could go, a child-free zone where I could go and do some work. But again, it's back to the younger generation who live in very tight apartments. And I think there's an opportunity for us to redesign those spaces, adaptable, modular furniture that can be used in one instance as a sofa to enjoy with your friends, and one instance to maybe decouple it and turn it into a workstation. I think personally, also because I love the work of residential work, I think that's a fabulous opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Niall. We have a question from Sergey Yuchenko. He's asking, Brandon, you might want to answer this one. Has your approach to feasibility studies requested by clients changed in light of COVID-19? Feasibility studies requested by clients, have they changed due to COVID-19? Is that, for example, he's saying, do your clients feel compelled to explore different occupancy densities as they are crucial in determining projects' profitability? We have touched on this a little bit, but Brandon, maybe you might want to expand on the answer for this question.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I know Sergey. I know we worked together in the past. But I think that's it's an interesting question. But I don't know how Niall feels about this, but the market is a little bit different than it was 3 or 4 months ago here in London. I think it's worth just touching on that very quickly. I thought the market here in the UK was doing incredibly well towards the end of last year and the beginning of this year, despite or in spite of some of these Brexit things going on over here and the uncertainty going on politically. Then the pandemic moved obviously from Asia towards Eastern Europe, Western Europe, across the United States, and we started to feel a downturn. So some of our work in the UK was put on pause, was put on hold. Obviously it's very hard to build buildings when you're not allowed to get on site. And we started, and I think because of our spread, I'm sure it's similar to Niall and Foster, where you have different offices, you can kind of compensate for the downturn in certain markets by using or allocating resources to jobs in markets that have not been affected as badly by the pandemic. So against that backdrop, we have started to see life improve in the last 2 to 3 weeks, particularly since our PM, Boris Johnson, alleviated some of these lockdown measures in early July, and actually non-essential businesses reopened this past Monday. So, you know, for a period of time there, it was not as active as it was in London, and we were doing a lot of work outside of the UK. In terms of the general feasibility of the work we were doing, yeah, it's important. I think there's a group of clients that we speak to who are fairly adamant by the time these buildings that we're discussing are built, life will be as it was 3 months ago. And this hiccup or whatever we've experienced will be something that we can learn from and move forward from, but will not drastically affect the way that buildings exist. There's another group of clients that are more concerned and are concerned that if a pandemic, or if and when the next pandemic happens, which I understand will be more frequently than it has been, you know, they want to be prepared. They want to be more resilient. And so, yeah, we are, for certain clients, there's a group that we are looking at reduced densities, more adaptability, configuring spaces more quickly. So it really depends on the market and the type of client we're speaking to, actually.
That's interesting because we've had a very similar experience. One set of clients who are much more bullish about it, and that life will return to normal in a very short period of time. And then another set of clients who are very keen on ensuring that they're agile, the ability to be agile in the future.
Yeah, people and organizations, firms would definitely want to be better prepared. God forbid there's a future pandemic like this, but yeah, people, you know, preparation is the key. People want to be more prepared. We have a question from Dilek Okutan. Dilek Ince says, thank you all for this productive, stimulating webinar. As an architect, she's an architect, I start to imagine some new materials could be brought to market after this crisis. Mehmet Okutan Bey, she's saying. See, she's asking, my question is kindly to Mehmet Okutan if possible. I recently start to see HypoClean technology provided as a household equipment. The HypoClean technology in household equipment. She's asking Mehmet Okutan Bey, can this be adapted to mechanical ventilation system? So HypoClean technology in mechanical ventilation system, is that possible, is her question.
I don't know HypoClean technology. Is this a brand? I'm not sure. Or is this a method?
It seems like it seems like a method. It's not clear. If perhaps you can expand on that in the next question.
Well, I must say, REHWA and ASHRAE are two associations, one American, the other one is European, checking what can be done in terms of materials to the medical systems. And REHWA says cleaning ducts or disinfecting them every day, for example, do not really make much difference in controlling the pandemic. But obviously, I mean, in the hospitals, we do have experience in how to control diseases and contagious diseases. So we know how to do it. I mean, if you plan it like a hospital, then it's going to be clean because you know how to filter it, how to disinfect it, and everything. But the problem with homes or commercial buildings is that you cannot design everything like a hospital, and it may not make really sense, especially as Niall and Brandon are saying, let's say 2 months later, 3 months later, maybe the society will start, you know, forgetting some of the fears that they had during this pandemic. I'm hoping that the better portion of it, the more sustainable part of it will stay and allow us to go forward more healthier and more energy efficient buildings. In terms of materials, my feeling is it is more about furniture, about cladding materials. I think they call it non-pathogenic materials now. I don't know, Niall, maybe you may want to add a few things about that, because I remember you told me something about the elevators, or you wood maybe?
Well, we just talked about materials that could inhibit the spread of viruses. We know that 80% of viruses are spread through contact. So the discussion was around the careful selection of materials that would potentially limit that spread. I think in indoor environments, especially in the office environments, I think the well building standards will evolve and take on a new meaning as we go forward. I think people will demand healthier and cleaner environments, both in their homes and in their workplaces.
We have a graduate student civil engineer question. Cihat Özeray. I actually do like this question. It's I think many people has this in their minds. During lockdown, he's saying no one was allowed to use public spaces, although some people need them for fresh air. On the other hand, when the measures are taken down, large groups of people seem to abuse the opportunity to create risk for other people. Do you see a way of utilizing parks for regular use? Do you see those areas getting more personalized? He's referring to areas around the residential buildings in metropolitan cities, I think. So when it comes to landscaping design and things like that, more personalized design for these public spaces, greener areas around the buildings. Brandon or Niall, any of you want to respond to that?
Well, you want to go now?
No, go ahead.
Well, I think it is a great question. The only thing I think it's worth me mentioning is that one of the beautiful things about outdoor spaces is you can go wherever you want to go. You can kind of explore spaces, and I think when you start to put constraints and personalize some of these spaces or confine people to certain areas, which I've seen, and Mehmet, you mentioned this with beaches and maybe they're cordoning off certain areas and you book a space on a beach, it feels kind of odd. It feels kind of unenjoyable in a way. So I guess my reaction is I would welcome more spaces, larger spaces, as opposed to breaking down the smaller spaces into individual places that people can exist in.
What we noticed during the lockdown, I mentioned about people's contribution to the City Lab organization with their maps. But what we noticed is we looked at a study of an aerial view of London, which is incredibly green, as you can imagine. But the public accessibility to that green is quite limited. A large portion of that green is private gardens, etc. So there is many people in residential blocks that have limited access to green parks. So we've been talking with the local councils about how we can reinvent a number of streets in London. Your typical London street has a narrow sidewalk on both sides, 2 rows of cars, and either a single or 2 rows of lanes down the middle. And working with Lambeth Council and a couple of other councils about how we could reinvent that street, finding a nearby vacant plot and in a typical New York style, potentially stacking the cars. We all imagine that the ownership of the car in the future will change and that requirement for space might be alleviated, but for the moment it's there. Stacking the cars, freeing up that space, giving us wider sidewalks, giving us an opportunity to create street furniture, street seating where the residents can come together, socially distanced, but can come together and communicate and transform our streets into much greener and in a way mini green parks and a space where people can enjoy the natural environment right on their doorstep. So, I mean, that's quite an exciting opportunity. But of course, the big thing is the car again, which is the architect's challenge for many years. Mehmet, I think you're muted.
Yeah.
So it's been a great seminar, very informative seminar. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you taking the time again out of your very busy schedules. I was talking with my colleagues. I have been talking with my colleagues. When people are like, working in the remote locations, sometimes it actually becomes, turns into a very lengthy conversation and makes it very difficult to catch up with the phone calls and emails like that. You have been industry leaders and I think it's very, not very too common to have industry leaders when it comes to design, to have them together and talk about the common topics and common goals. We all know that many things will never be the same as it was before the pandemic in various industries. I think we discussed some of the possibilities today in the construction and design industry specifically. Again, thank you so much, Niall, Brandon, Mehmet, Okutan. We really appreciate your time. Anybody else to add anything?
No, the only thing I failed to mention is that I'm in the office today. So I'm one of 100 individuals over the course of the last 2 weeks who have slowly made their way back to the office. I mean, I cycle to work. I don't use public transport. We don't encourage any use of public transport. But there is we are slowly moving back to some form of normality.
All right. Well, we wish everyone healthy days. Take care of all your friends, families, and your co-workers for us. Thank you so much. Have wonderful and healthy days, everyone.
Likewise.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.